Hey folks, welcome back to class today. The online proportion um, of our concept design course, and so today we're going to be studying two things that seem very different, but actually they very important to our assignment and environment, and placing our character in an environment that's somewhat unfamiliar to them. So we're going to start with looking at our main character that we've been designing, and I'm going to start breaking down somewhat of the anatomy, not by name or anything like that, just by shapes and how that might help you further develop your character, and then also understand how that plays a role in stylistically and physically in your environment, both at the home environment and of course at the in the environment that's somewhat foreign to them or brand new. Um, how those things might change over time. So let's get going on it. All right, so here we have our main character, or my main character for um, the series that I'm creating here. So this is what I've decided as, for the most part, my final look without really blocking in any of the colors yet. And I want to really start to show the purpose of several things. Like, obviously, this character is very clothed and has a lot of things happening, and that's more for relationship to culture and your audience. And so, as you can see, this character is pretty roughly drawn, and so what I wanted this character to look like is someone that's young, but also has deep wisdom, nomadic kind of wisdom. The character is meant to be one that can kind of somewhat exist in every organic environment, and the challenge is going to be how she exists moving forward into more non-organic environments. So you can see she's quite decorated. She's got a, like a fairly average body type size. Quite a bit of expression and mood to her. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take her and I'm going to show you how anatomy works with this character. Just kind of like the bone structure, but also and muscle structure mostly actually. But so let's get into that. So what I've designed here is a real basic breakdown of this character in her pose. And I tend to really navigate towards seeing characters, especially when they're as cartoony as this, as shapes, more than I would see them as actual anatomy. But it's all based on anatomy, so you're learning where to push and pull things quite a bit, and that's how you would animate that character. And obviously, you would love to study anatomy as much as you can so that you can make better choices in a character such as this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a little bit about why I've designed her the way I have. I do want her to be a nimble kind of character, so let's start at the feet. Someone who's on their toes quite a bit. You think of things like ballerinas, people that are swift-footed, such as a ninja or something like that. And so I wanted to focus on making something that wasn't too difficult, not too complex. She's just got really small, tiny feet and basically moves on her toes quite a bit. Quite balanced though, so has a little bit of a wider stance. You'll notice here that as we move up in our design here, that these shapes are a little offset, and as to be not only just natural to how the muscle contorts, how it looks. And so you'll notice that I have an angle. So when really pressure builds up here, these elements will shift to become stronger in some ways. Like so. Likewise. What you're doing is you end up pushing and pulling lot of these points, pull them out and in. And so that's how you start to think about how the muscles work. And then what you'll end up doing is you can end up softening it, so you get more of a cleaner shape. But I like thinking of things like this first, where you're looking at how things are being pulled and pushed and pulled. Same things with the kneecaps. You can really pinch them down from these points. And these are the general shapes that I like to work by. Depending on your character could have thinner legs. General body mass of the muscles, I like to think, works in such a fashion that we have things that are quite offset. And this isn't going to be the same muscle structure for everybody, and I'll give you an example of that in a moment. So I like how they really focus to the inside. Because it's a wide stance character, you want the wider your character is going to be in a strong stance, means that often these muscles tend to pinch up towards the top and push down towards the knee, because that's where the gravity is going to lie. So you want to really accent this weight that's happening here. You may even bulk it a little bit if you need to. But that's where the gravity is. So this could be someone that's a heavy runner. Generally the same thing with torsos. You get your basic shape you want. Your line of action to really follow through. There's a spine that happens here too that we want to be sure that we're building within the character. Here's an important point too. So you can start to see all the shapes, decipher it for yourself, what you think is right. But talk a lot about doing things in an asymmetrical way. And here's a way where it's super broken down to being asymmetrical on many levels. But even just in the stance, let's look at, you have your hip line, you have your shoulder line, more mid-torso. Everything starts to really level out. Then we balance it back out again. And these are our grids. Let's just level again. And you can see how I follow the bicep and tricep here to a certain shape where, again, you're just looking at diamonds. And there's more intricate shapes in there the closer you get in, but we're usually going to be dealing with our character at such a distance where they're not flexing. So, you want to suggest things and not have to necessarily overdo the anatomy. You'll notice that a lot on shows like Korra. They're really good at understanding anatomy, and they barely even need to suggest it most of the time. So there you go. There's a quick lesson in anatomy there. But I don't know. I'm not sold on this character. So let's see what we can explore with her. And maybe, I really want her to be, I still like the smaller statuesque sort of character that I have here, but maybe let's experiment a little bit. So we can take the same type of thing, and I do want her to have a little bit more strength or elegance in her legs and a lot more balance. So let's just do a quick trick of trying to maybe shorten her up us. The arms may be a little bit smaller too, or shorter. And it's important to do this kind of thing. I mean, I'm just using Photoshop tools to do this, but I think it's good to redraw a lot of these elements. And so one thing you can do here, moving forward, is now let's redraw these legs. So I want a character that's maybe more, so a little bit, maybe she's a little bit thinner here, so that we can really pop out some of let's make our torso just a bit smaller as well. Think of a deer, let's say. So now I'm going to start taking these shapes that I had built before. Add some nodes there. Keep these shapes going. I want these to angle outwards. The reason being, I want a lot of the strength to come from high, and so we're going to get an even wider stance in this character now. Perhaps a little bit more like a deer or like a rabbit. So in which case, I may pull this node all the way up here. Let's see what that looks like. We'll lower this one and pull it down a bit more. And of course, this means I'm going to have to shift a couple of these things around. I kind of wanted to look at maybe having some longer legs. And so instead of necessarily thinning everything out, you get the same effect by lengthening them and changing some of the sizes of some things. In this case, I'm going to follow the line right down. And I still like the power of this. I'm going to accent it just a bit more. Of course, change the angle for feet. Let me see what I'm doing here is that these operate like a diamond, more so. So you can start to see the three-dimensional shape that I'm trying to pull with and what nodes I'm pinching there. That's a more power runner. And when you start to do things like that, you may want to end up adding some of the similar elements here where just lengthen that arm a bit. And when you're making these decisions, you can start to see then how when you start building those nodes that you can push and pull these corners, you can start to see how far your expression can be taken. And guys like Nico Marley and there's other fantastic designers that can really master this sort of stuff really quickly. And this is exactly how they envision things: is by the corners, not of your shape, not by making everything so uniform. Then you may, and once you start making some of these decisions on how the body reacts, you can really play with, then maybe that character is a little too wide for my liking. Cool. Something a little bit more slick. Really play with the shapes, and it's a good time in your life to really decide these things now. Before you really start developing your style. So, yeah, there you have it. You can start building on top of your character even more now, and that's a good way to start to understand anatomy. Now, in the next stage, we're going to be looking at how to do this with environment design. And so I want you to take note of how I've treated some of these elements, because we'll carry them forward. And I know that I've said before that you want to put your character in a foreign setting, but it still, I think, largely works best when it looks like you've been working with the same mindset. All things have come to life from a certain perspective at some point, and we're just exploring different regions of the same world. And so you might not have something that's as intricate as this. You may have elements in your other world that's farther broken down into something that's more abstract, or it just acts in the opposite way of the way that these muscles work, let's say, and how your pins work here. And you may have characters that are small in stature, like this one is. She's like a medium-sized kind of person, and then yet everything else is just going to be more elongated and more exaggerated of these more natural shapes. So let's get into exploring some of that. I hope this aspect has helped you understand a little bit more about how anatomy works for your character, so that you can then take them easier, put them into certain posing more comfortably, knowing what lies beneath and what shapes are and how the shapes react. All right, so here I've collected all my reference now, and here's a couple of examples of some subways, Comic-Con, and also a town in the distance where it's really dry. So that's what I'm going to draw first to get our character into their new area that they're going to be accustomed to. And so my main character comes from kind of a swampy area where it's really lifelike, and so now I'm going to be designing a place where there isn't a whole lot of life naturally, but there will be one growing. So I want to use some of the same shapes that we've been using in our characters, but there's going to be an asterisk next to it, a little bit of a difference in that, so I'm going to be using the same overall shape, but then within that, breaking it into really more basic shapes, so that these characters and all these elements that are within the environment separate themselves from her. So as you can see here, I'm just building the town in that same asymmetrical shape that we first started with. And as I build the silhouette, you can see that it's got the same shape, and I start to break it apart so that it's a little bit more unique with the desired effect. And so what I've also started to do is detail it, but not in the same way that we've detailed our character, but yet it still carries the same properties. So she's detailed with different types of fabrics and materials and things like that have been given to her and woven over time, and in this case we're using that in an industrial type of manner. So pipes and all sorts of smokestacks and things like that we're trying to build to give character to this place. We don't want it to be too stale. We want it to still live within the same world, so that we're not obviously trying to show the differences, but we are in material and in character to a certain degree. So I'm just really trying to make sure this area looks as dry as possible, as opposed to her natural look, which is a lot more lifelike, embodies a little bit more of water within her solid shape. So there we have our town. Really basic thumbnail that we can build on later, get some general colors down that we may like. We can play with it a little bit and then move on to the next one. So the next idea was that I wanted to think of a place where she could feel very comfortable, in that there's people that are expressive, in that they're very different and colorful, but it's not their natural state. This is a Comic-Con idea. So I really wanted to build the framework of a large warehouse type room, drawing attention to, of all places, the loo, a washroom, and just a place where I could show where we have characters that now are in this world, and maybe somewhat relatable to this character, but yet at the same time they're not. And the reason why I did the characters this way was, if you can see in her character, she's got a lot of asymmetrical shapes in just within, and how her muscles are used and different things like that. And so what I wanted to do is build an environment that supports symmetry, broken up by small things such as the pictures that are on the walls and things like that are natural at Comic-Cons. And the shapes are just a little bit off aligned, so that they have a little bit of character to her, because we don't want to build such a stale world. But the point of this story is that she's in a world that has some excitement, but yet it's new to her. And so through her eyes, you can see a lot of excitement, but a lot of things that just fit into groups. And so with the characters, when I start building them, they may have some expressive poses, but realistically, actually, they really carry symmetry, and their shapes are more basic, and only expressive within that. So in that case, as we did the character before, the main character, her legs had unique shape to them, as did her arms and torso, and even expressions in her face. And then these characters generally have a lot of unison within the simplicity of their posing and their shapes, because they basically just want to fit into the scene, and not draw attention to themselves, in too many ways. So you want to make them unique because you want them to fit into the scene, but you also don't want to overcomplicate them, like they show too much motion, and that eventually draws your eyes away from your main character. So I really just wanted to show a scene here where you're really just blocking out space. It's a thumbnail, so what you're doing is that you're just trying to lay out the composition, what goes in each of these shots, the general size of them. You can play with all this kind of stuff as much as you like down the road. And so you can see that we're starting to build the shapes all together. These are a collective, and there's our little main character in the corner there. And she's a little different. The way that I would generally color this is give her more of a unique color as opposed to the rest. And we can be vibrant in here. Not everything has to be stale. And we can start to show where the highlight of our scene goes to, and how she fits into this scene, generally. So I'm just selecting a bunch of colors that I think might help and might work. See how it looks, and then we'll move on. Move on from this one. So that is the washroom scene in this particular sequence. And so then the final one that we're going to work on here is a subway scene. So I wanted to see how she fits into a real metallic environment, a place where it's very urban. So she comes from the actual jungle, and this is the urban jungle now. So I picked up a couple pictures from some Japanese subways and of course the New York subway, just to get some reference. And I usually should have more reference than this, but so I just started drawing the thumbnails, and so you'll start to notice that I'm using a lot of symmetrical shapes, repeating them and repeating them as much as possible without, I'm getting a little bit rough here, but you want to make sure that you're carrying over some of what she embodies, as she has some angular shapes in her too, and you're repeating those things so that it's somewhat familiar, but then at the same time, because they're asymmetrical, it breaks it apart for her. And so when you're looking at things that are in unison and they carry meaning to one another, and yet everything that she's been so used to is this more chaos of nature, and how everything is different, and how she picks up elements of different things and how she builds it. And so here I'm offering a place where we break that a little bit. We give symmetry, and then we add a little bit of character here. So I'm adding some dirt and some newspapers and things like that, so that it's got a little bit of character to this place, a little bit of chaos. But you can see that there's still a lot of the similar shapes that are happening. And so that really stylistically fits in to her world. If I just started building everything where it was the very much opposite of, if I did rounded shapes and things like that, it's like you're telling your audience too literal a story, and it doesn't seem to really work. But in this case, it does. That it works that we have these all the same geometry around us, and we're just using it differently. And so, yeah, I just started to make sure that this place is filled with a lot of character. You can start to get the scent of the place, and add some character to it, give it some life. And even this is without characters in it, so this is a really good way to work with your character and have your characters living in an environment without even really starting to get fully into the depth of them yet and the full detail. You're just here to sketch and make sure that your ideas are down first, and then you'll get in and start detailing things and painting it, and that's what we'll get into in the upcoming classes. So there you have it. There's a couple of thumbnails to go by, and the next week we'll end up working harder on refining some of these to a more plausible detail. Perfect. All right, students, so that's what we got so far in this week's class. We're going to get into cleaning up some of your designs and my design in the next class, and I can start showing you how to really block out these shapes and start using color theory and so forth on this. But right now we're still just planning. Everybody's doing really great, and I look forward to seeing what everybody has to show me by the end of this class. So good luck, and I wish you all the best. Take care.